Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Angel, and this is my week 3 discussion board on civil liberties and civil rights. So, freedom of religion, which is stated in the First Amendment. So, freedom of religion, simply defined, is that the government cannot establish an official state religion or mess with or interfere with their citizens and their religious practices, whether they believe or do not believe in faith. Some misconceptions that people get from freedom of religion is that religious beliefs can override actual laws in the United States, which is not true. Religious practices can be outlawed if they go against the law of the United States. For example, a religion cannot you cannot kill somebody just because your religion says to. Obviously, that is against the law in the United States, and action will be taken against you. Another misconception is that the government kind of censors religion or can censor your right to practice religion. This is not true. Individuals are given the right, obviously stated in the First Amendment, that they can express their religion in any way, shape, or form, whether it's in private or public, as long as it doesn't interfere with lawful orders. So, freedom of speech, which is also listed in the First Amendment. So, simply defined, freedom of speech basically states that people of the United States cannot be punished by the government for expressing their ideas or their opinions to the public or to other citizens. Even though this does come with some consequences, though, even though it is kind of listed as freedom of speech, there can be consequences to what people say. So, some common misconceptions that people get is that, oh, since it's listed that I have free speech in the First Amendment, that I can just go around saying whatever I want to anybody, anywhere, and nothing will happen. This is not true. Um, Obviously, yes, you can say whatever you want because it's free speech, but when you start to talk about things like threats or um, another thing like defamation of someone's character, which there have been many lawsuits over, um, your speech can be limited and it can have consequences because you can't just go around saying, I'm going to harm someone without facing consequences from law enforcement. Another misconception would be that since I work for a company that um, free speech is listed in the First Amendment, I can also say whatever I want, and this company can't terminate me or fire me. This is not true. The First Amendment obviously protects free speech from the government, but because private companies work differently in some ways from the government, they have every right to fire you if what you say goes against their company guidelines or uh, hurts others within the workspace. So next is freedom of the press, which is also listed in the First Amendment. So a simple definition I would say is that the government cannot censor or try to control news media outlets or news sources from publishing information. So some misconceptions that we get from freedom of the press is that this gives these news sources or media outlets the right to publish whatever they want or say whatever they want about someone or something. This is not true, and there can be consequences, legal consequences to this. There have been many instances where a news media source or outlet will post an article or on the news say something about someone or something, and if it happens to be false, it can be seen as defamation of character and not true. And there have been many instances where many news media outlets get sued and face legal action because of what they publish to the American people. Another misconception I would say is that many people think this freedom of the press, First Amendment right, only extends to media outlets that they say on TV. This is actually not true. Anybody can be seen as a journalist or a blogger as long as you are trying to get information across to people and do what you think is best for the American people to hear. And so anybody can exercise this freedom of press amendment right. So next is search and seizure, which is part of the Fourth Amendment. So a simple definition would be that anybody who works in law enforcement or is part of the government must have in some way probable cause, and in most times a warrant to actually investigate or search someone or their own private property. So misconceptions that people get with this search and seizure law is that someone in law enforcement, for example, a police officer, must need a warrant in order to search my person or my private property. This is usually not true in some cases. If a police officer has probable cause or has consent, or it is another case like an emergency, they actually do not need a signed warrant from a judge. They can go based off of their training and the fact that they have probable cause that there is something illegal or there is an emergency going on. This gives them the right to search your person or your private property. And going based off of this police officer example, there's another misconception that people think that officers need probable cause or need a warrant in order to ask you questions about something that may be going on. This is in some cases not true. Officers can ask anything without probable cause. They can ask you anything they feel is appropriate for the situation, and they don't need probable cause in order to try and get an answer from you. So next is due process of the law, specifically for this Fifth Amendment. Simply defined, due process means that the government must give you fair procedures or fair prosecutions before they just give you a criminal sentence and basically take your freedom and your property away from you. So some common misconceptions that people get from this is that this due process um, gives people a better outcome. This actually isn't really true. It guarantees you a fair trial in court and to stand before a jury, but it does not guarantee you a specific result in your specific case. And another thing that people get wrong about due process is that it only shows up in criminal cases. That's actually not true. It also shows up in other things outside of criminal cases like civil cases. And the main goal of this due process is to grant everybody a fair trial and to be able to stand before a jury and prove your innocence. So next is the Ninth Amendment. So the Ninth Amendment, simply defined, is that people have rights that go beyond the Constitution, that are listed in the Constitution. So basically, it's saying that even though the founding fathers didn't list all of our rights in the amendments in the Constitution, we have rights that, even though aren't listed, go beyond that. And so some common misconceptions is that people tend to say, well, if it's not in the Constitution, then it's not a right and it isn't given to the people. That's not true. This whole Ninth Amendment basically goes against that whole idea and says that no, you do have rights that go beyond the Constitution. So this would be a misconception. So another misconception for the Ninth Amendment is that we can just create new rights out of anywhere and any place. So the Ninth Amendment recognizes we have rights beyond the Constitution, but that doesn't mean we can just create new ones out of nowhere, especially if they're just absurd. Like, there's basic human rights that we're given and that we're given under the United States, and so we just cannot create a random new right out of nowhere, and it completely goes against our Constitution, or it's just biased towards someone. So next is the 10th Amendment, and the 10th Amendment basically states that any powers that aren't given to the federal government of the United States, they then belong to the individual states or the people of that state. And so some misconceptions that people get about the 10th Amendment is that since states are given the leftover power, that they can just ignore federal laws or federal mandates. That's not true. States, at the end of the day, must follow laws from the federal government and that within our Constitution under separate clauses. And so basically, yeah, so states must still abide to the federal government. And another misconception is that this 10th Amendment may give states sort of power or unlimited power over uh, other things, and that's not true. Again, states are still um, restricted to abiding by the Constitution and abiding to federal laws and mandates at the end of the day. So next is equal protection under the 14th Amendment. This kind of like goes off of the Fifth Amendment in some way, I would say. So a definition of equal protection would be that the government has a right to treat people equally under the law of the United States, especially in cases where it regards people's rights and other stuff like that. And so, some misconceptions that people get is that equal protection means that everyone is supposed to be treated the same. Um, Obviously, everybody should be treated the same, but there can be different forms of treatment applied to people if it is seen as sort of justified and lawful under the United States Constitution and allowed by our government. And another misconception is that people only apply equal protection to race, but that isn't entirely true. It also applies to things like gender or where someone is from, and obviously applies to their nationality and also other classifications. So it doesn't just apply to someone's race entirely. It applies to many other factors on how they identify themselves and where they're from, and yeah. So last and finally is discrimination, which is a very talked about topic in the world today. Um, Discrimination, simply defined, is basically if you treat someone poor or unfairly because of their characteristics, like if you treat them poorly because of how they look, where they're from, their gender, their religion that they believe in, that is a form of discrimination. And so, some misconceptions about discrimination is that um, discrimination only applies to minorities. Obviously, minorities have faced most of the discrimination that we have seen throughout the world, but also there have been people of majority groups who have also faced discrimination from many people and some people in minority groups. So it sort of goes both ways in some ways, and so I would say that was a misconception. And another misconception is that discrimination happens because it was there on purpose. That's not true in some ways. There have been policies from companies or policies or laws that weren't meant to be discriminatory, but as we look back on it, we see that okay, there could have been some changes made to this law or policy that could allow everybody to have a chance to participate or join whatever they want to join in. So I would say that's a misconception about discrimination. And so overall, yeah, discrimination is basically just treating someone unfairly or poorly because of who they are and where they're from and what they believe in. So that's it for my civil rights and civil liberties week 3 discussion, and I thank you guys all for listening.